Have you ever noticed that, like, in today's world, it always feels like something's missing?
Oh, yeah.
There's not enough time, not enough money, not enough, well, you fill in the blank. It's kind of like our brains are always scanning for deficits.
It is, yeah.
Yeah.
It's that feeling of like not enough that can really lead to what we often call this scarcity mindset.
Mhm.
And it's important to realize like this isn't like a personal failing or anything like that. This is like a super deeply rooted survival instinct from way back when focusing on like potential shortages was super crucial for staying alive.
Yeah, yeah. It makes sense, right?
Totally.
But here's the thing. What used to be like a crucial tool for survival can now actually prevent us from achieving the abundance we want. And it can like narrow our focus, stifle our creativity, and ultimately lead to decisions that keep us stuck.
Yeah.
So in this deep dive, we are going to explore how our brains work when they see those limitations.
And more importantly, we're going to look at how we can actually kind of rewire those ingrained patterns.
Yeah.
Our sources today actually explore the neuroscience behind this shift, pointing to like specific neurological patterns that are seen in people who consistently create abundance. Some people call this the billionaire brain wave.
The billionaire brain wave.
Yeah.
Now, I gotta say, that sounds pretty intriguing. But before we get too far into it, I just want to be clear, this isn't about some mystical brain frequency, right?
Right.
Instead, it's about understanding these neurological differences.
Mhm.
And more importantly, how we can, I guess, cultivate those patterns ourselves.
Yes.
So our mission today is to really understand these neurological underpinnings and to identify actionable steps that anyone listening can take to actually foster this mindset of abundance and ultimately, I guess that's the goal, more success, right?
For sure.
Let's start by looking at what actually happens in our brains when we sense scarcity.
Okay.
Research out of Princeton University has some really fascinating insights here.
Absolutely.
So let's unpack this a bit. When we talk about scarcity, what exactly is happening neurologically?
Well, when our brains perceive scarcity, whether that's like a lack of money, time, even emotional support, it triggers like a chain reaction.
Oh,
Our attention narrows in, it hyper-focuses on like just that immediate shortage.
okay.
At the same time, our stress response kicks in and our body starts pumping out hormones like cortisol.
Ah, cortisol, the
It's-
stress hormone,
It's
right?
stress hormone, exactly.
So we become hyper-focused and stressed. What else is going on in the brain?
Okay, so this is really interesting. The activity in our prefrontal cortex,
Yeah.
the part of our brain that's responsible for planning, rational thought, making those complex decisions, that actually starts to decrease.
Interesting.
At the same time, though, the amygdala, which is kind of like our brain's alarm system, it goes, ooh, 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 something's wrong. That becomes more active.
Okay.
So this combination, it really starts to like impact our cognitive abilities. It shrinks our mental space that's available for things like creativity and problem solving.
Got it. So it's almost like our brain goes into this like emergency survival mode. Like it's prioritizing that immediate survival over those like higher level thinking skills.
Exactly. It leads to what's often called tunneling.
Definitely.
Yeah. So we become so fixated on whatever that lack is that we lose sight of the bigger picture and, the long-term consequences.
Okay.
Like, let's say, think of someone who's in, a financial crunch and they take out a high-interest loan just to make ends meet for the month,
Yeah.
right? They're so focused on just getting through that immediate need
Yeah.
that they're not thinking about the long-term cost, which could be really devastating.
Right. Right.
So that tunnel vision, that's really the root of why we get so consumed by these not enough thoughts.
It makes total sense.
Yeah.
It really is just that primal instinct, like kicking in.
Totally.
When you think about it, our ancestors, they faced those like immediate threats. So it makes sense that intense, super narrow focus would be crucial, right?
It was a huge evolutionary advantage, especially in those, like life or death situations.
Yeah.
But in our modern world, where scarcity is so often chronic and more subtle, that same response can become a huge disadvantage.
Yeah.
It can really lead us to make those, poor long-term decisions based on that immediate pressure.
It sounds like this scarcity mindset can be really powerful. And I think you even mentioned that it can be self-perpetuating. So how does that cycle actually work?
It's a really unfortunate negative feedback loop, to be honest with you.
Okay.
It usually starts with those short-sighted decisions that are driven by just needing immediate relief.
Okay.
But, because those decisions aren't really well considered or like future-oriented, they often create more problems down the line.
Right. It's like always relying on a quick fix that ends up having, negative consequences later.
Exactly. And those new problems, well, they just reinforce that original feeling of scarcity.
Right.
So we feel even more trapped and limited, which then causes our brain to narrow its focus even further, and it just keeps going. Poor decisions, more scarcity, poor decisions, more scarcity. It's like being stuck in quicksand.
Yeah.
The more you struggle, the deeper you sink.
It's a powerful image for sure.
Yeah.
And the research by Dr. Mullainathan and Dr. Shafir, it really highlights just how big of a cognitive impact this has. They found that a scarcity mindset can actually lower someone's effective IQ by as much as 13 points.
13 points. It's massive. That's like,
Yeah.
The equivalent of like pulling an all-nighter.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, that constant worry, all that mental energy that's spent dwelling on what we lack, it literally makes us less sharp. Less able to think clearly, less creative, and less capable of finding those solutions to the very problems that we're so worried about. It's a serious, serious cognitive tax.
So we've talked about the problem a bit. Now, how do we know if we're actually caught in this scarcity trap? What are some of the signs we should be looking for?
Well, that's the most important first step, becoming aware.
Right.
There's a lot of common symptoms that can kind of point to a scarcity mindset.
Okay.
So you ever noticed, you dismiss a new idea or an opportunity, and you immediately just have that gut feeling that says, that won't work for me.
Oh, all the time. That little voice of doubt is strong.
It is. That's a classic sign. Another one is what's called zero-sum thinking.
Okay.
It's this belief that resources are finite and that if someone else wins, you automatically lose. Like there's just a limited pie of success to go around.
Yeah, I've definitely caught myself in that line of thinking, especially I think in competitive situations.
For sure. For sure. Other signs, could include decision paralysis, that feeling of being so afraid to make the wrong choice. You feel like you can't afford to make a mistake, that you end up just not making any choice at all.
Right.
There's constant comparison to others.
Right.
Always looking at what other people have and feeling like you don't measure up.
I feel like social media doesn't help with that.
No, it doesn't. It really
Yeah.
doesn't. There's the hoarding of resources or information, that feeling like you need to cling to whatever you have, even if it's not really serving you.
Yeah.
Resistance to collaboration can also come from scarcity, that fear that sharing is somehow going to take away from your own resources.
Well, yeah, if you're constantly operating from this place of lack, it makes sense that sharing would feel a bit risky.
It does. It really does. Some other things to be mindful of, there's chronic stress and anxiety, specifically when it comes to things like money, time, or just your security. Struggling to genuinely celebrate the success of other people can also be a red flag. And lastly, a tendency to just look for immediate gratification, prioritizing that short-term pleasure or relief over like long-term well-being. Often that's fueled by that underlying feeling of, I don't have enough.
Yeah, as you were going through that list, I'm not going to lie, I could definitely recognize a few of those in my own thoughts and behaviors. I'm sure lots of people listening can too.
For sure. Yeah, most of us experience this to some degree.
Okay, so we've talked about the problem, identifying it. Now let's talk about the solution.
Yes.
We keep mentioning this billionaire brain wave. So what exactly is it, and how is it different neurologically?
Well, like I mentioned before, the billionaire brain wave, it's not like this magical frequency or anything like that.
Right.
It's a term that researchers use to describe observable differences in the neural activity of people who consistently demonstrate this ability to create abundance in lots of different areas of their lives.
Got it. So it's more like a characteristic pattern of activity in the brain.
Exactly.
Perfect.
Research shows that when these individuals face challenges, they show more activity in the neocortex. That's the part of the brain that's responsible for higher level functions like, that creative problem solving and strategic thinking.
Okay, so that's like the opposite of what happens in a scarcity mindset, where that prefrontal cortex activity decreases, right?
You got it. And when these individuals, face setbacks, they tend to show less activation in the amygdala, that alarm bell,
Right.
which means that they experience a much weaker stress response than someone who's operating from a place of scarcity. They're able to stay calmer and more rational in the face of, those difficult situations.
Right, which has got to make a huge difference in how you respond to those setbacks.
Oh, yeah,
If you're not panicking, you're a lot more likely to come up with a solution.
absolutely.
Yeah.
It also seems like they have just greater connectivity between different parts of their brain, particularly the parts that are involved in both analytical and creative thinking.
Interesting.
Yeah, so they can approach problem solving from this, more holistic and innovative perspective.
Okay.
They also tend to have higher baseline levels of those, those neurochemicals that are associated with like optimism and resilience.
Okay.
They're just naturally inclined to see those possibilities.
Now, I think you also mentioned something about alpha wave patterns, right?
Yes. Yes, these individuals, they often exhibit more consistent alpha wave patterns, which are associated with a state of, calm focus and just, mental clarity. So they can think more clearly, they can make better decisions, and all without being, completely overwhelmed by that stress or anxiety.
So it really does sound like the billionaire brainwave is like this brain that's geared towards problem solving, resilience, and just seeing opportunities rather than, dwelling on the limitations and the potential threats.
You got it. And the most encouraging part of this is that our brains are actually incredibly adaptable. It's a
Yeah.
concept called neuroplasticity.
Okay.
Means we can actually change these patterns.
So how do we actually cultivate this billionaire brainwave in our own
Right.
brains? What are some practical strategies we can take from the sources we've been looking at?
Okay, well, our sources actually highlight 6 strategies that I think are really, really helpful. The first one is what's called pattern interruption. So let's say you catch yourself having this scarcity thought, like that feeling of, like, I can't afford this, or there's just not enough time.
Mm-hmm.
You need to consciously interrupt that thought pattern
Okay.
and redirect your brain towards a solution instead.
So how do we do that?
Yeah.
Like, how do we actually put that into practice?
Okay, so first you need to notice the thought. Just
Yeah.
acknowledge it without judgment.
Mm-hmm.
Don't beat yourself up about it. Then just take a couple of deep breaths, to kind of interrupt that immediate emotional response, that anxiety or that feeling of limitation.
Okay.
And then try asking yourself, what's the opportunity here? Even if it seems like a negative situation, try to find at least one potential benefit or like a learning experience.
Mm.
Challenge that assumption of limitation. Instead of thinking, I can't afford it, ask yourself, how can I create the resources for this? That little shift in perspective, it can prevent what some people call an amygdala hijack,
Mm-hmm.
where, your fear response takes over. And it helps bring that, rational planning part of your brain, that prefrontal cortex, back online.
Right, right.
So the key here is to break that automatic negative thought pattern and just redirect your brain towards finding a solution.
Makes sense. It's like consciously choosing to go down a different mental path. Right.
Totally.
Okay, so what's the second strategy?
All right. The second one is all about gratitude.
Oh, gratitude.
Yeah, gratitude. Now, research shows that practicing gratitude can actually have a really profound impact on our brain chemistry.
Oh, so?
It actually increases the production of dopamine and serotonin, which are those feel-good neurochemicals, right?
Right.
And it can lower your cortisol levels, the stress hormone, by as much as 23% in some studies. It's pretty amazing.
Wow, that's huge.
It is. It also activates the brain's reward pathways, which just reinforces those positive feelings, and it kind of expands our cognitive resources.
Okay, so how do we actually implement a gratitude practice in a way that really works?
The key is to be specific and to be consistent.
Okay.
Our sources suggest that, you should try writing down at least 3 specific things that you're grateful for every single day. And importantly, write down why you're grateful for them. Don't just list them out.
Mm-hmm.
That intentional focus is what deepens the impact.
Got it.
Even if you're facing some real challenges, try to focus on even the small things.
Mm-hmm.
Like maybe a supportive friend, a sunny day, a skill that you possess. Just doing this consistently, even if it's just for a few minutes every day, research suggests that can actually create noticeable positive changes in your neural pathways in about 21 days.
Okay, so 3 specific things with detailed reasons. Got it. I can commit to that.
I think you can too.
What's the third strategy?
Okay, so this one is called possibility meditation.
Okay.
It involves spending about 10 minutes each day actively visualizing your life with abundant resources. The key here is to really engage all of your senses.
So what should we be visualizing?
Okay, so imagine how your body would feel in this abundant state. Would it feel relaxed? Would it feel energized?
Mm-hmm.
Visualize those opportunities that you're pursuing. Are you pursuing them with confidence, with ease?
Okay.
Picture your interactions with others.
Mm-hmm.
Are they collaborative? Are they supportive? And see yourself solving problems creatively and effectively because you feel resourceful.
Okay.
By doing this, we're actually strengthening those neural networks that are associated with abundance thinking.
Mm-hmm.
And gradually, we can start to weaken those scarcity pathways. It's like we're creating a mental blueprint for abundance.
Right. And the more vividly and consistently you do this, the more your brain will actually start to believe that abundance is possible. And then it will start looking for evidence to support that belief in your daily life.
Exactly.
Exactly.
Pretty cool. So what's the fourth strategy?
Okay, so this one might seem a bit counterintuitive, but it's called strategic generosity.
Strategic generosity.
Yeah?
How does giving lead to abundance.
Mm,
Well, it's not about just recklessly giving things away.
okay.
It's more about a calculated approach to sharing.
Yeah.
When you strategically share knowledge with people who can amplify it, when you contribute your resources to valuable networks, when you invest time in helping others without expecting an immediate return, and when you just focus on creating value before trying to extract it, you're activating those reward circuits in your brain. And it actually reinforces those abundance patterns. You're shifting your focus from, I don't have enough, to we're all in this together, and understanding the power of just giving back.
It's like you're signaling to your brain that you have enough to share.
Exactly. And it often comes back to you in unexpected ways, whether that's new opportunities, stronger relationships, or even just a shift in your own perception of what's actually possible.
I like that. Strategic generosity. What's the fifth way to cultivate this billionaire brain wave?
All right, number 5 is environment optimization.
Okay.
Our surroundings have a massive impact on our brains and how they function.
So tell me more about that.
Well, try surrounding yourself with people who have a growth mindset, people that inspire you. Consciously consume information that challenges those scarcity assumptions and just opens your mind to new possibilities. Create physical spaces that evoke those feelings of positivity and possibility.
Okay.
Get rid of the clutter, let in some natural light, things like that. And on the flip side, limit your exposure to media and environments that just constantly bombard you with messages of lack and limitation.
So it's about curating the input, both physically and mentally.
Yeah, it's like optimizing your environment for an abundance mindset.
Makes sense. What's that sixth and final strategy?
Okay, number 6 is to create a success tracking system.
Success tracking system.
Yeah, basically, it's all about taking the time to document your wins, no matter how small they may seem.
Okay, so what kinds of things should we be tracking?
Well, anything that represents progress. A new skill that you learned, a problem that you solved, a new connection you made, a resource that you acquired, or just any way that you created value for yourself or for other people.
Got it.
When you do this, you're training your brain to actively notice those opportunities and those wins. It's like we're retraining our brains to see the positive instead of just hyper-focusing on what's missing.
It's amazing how much power our brains have to adapt and to change based on the input that we give them.
It really is.
I think our source even provides a case study of someone who put all these principles into practice.
They did. Her name's Sarah. She's a freelance designer.
Hmm.
And she was really, really struggling with that scarcity mindset.
Okay.
She was constantly worried about finding clients, which led her to undercharge for her services, take on those less than ideal clients. She worked crazy hours. She neglected to, develop her skills. She isolated herself from potential collaborators. She was afraid of competition. And it was just this whole, vicious cycle.
That sounds really tough to break.
It was. But, after 90 days of consistently using those billionaire brainwave practices, things started to change for her.
Oh, wow. So only 90 days.
Yeah. She got the courage to raise her rates by 60%.
Wow.
And she actually ended up with a waiting list of, qualified clients. She was able to create this passive income product. She started this amazing and profitable collaboration with some people that she used to see as competitors. And she started working fewer hours while achieving even better results.
That's incredible. That's a pretty dramatic transformation in a relatively short time.
It really is. It really is. And what's fascinating is that brain scans actually showed changes in her brain.
Really?
Yeah. Her amygdala activity decreased, which means that she had, a reduced stress response, and her prefrontal cortex engagement increased, suggesting that her rational thinking and problem-solving abilities had actually improved.
So it wasn't just her circumstances that changed, but her brain actually changed as well.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And the best part is this shift is self-reinforcing. So, as Sarah began to operate from this place of abundance, she just naturally started to notice more opportunities. Creative solutions came easier to her. She attracted those supportive and resource-rich relationships. She was able to bounce back from those setbacks more quickly. Her decision-making improved, and her overall stress levels decreased, which, just continued to enhance her cognitive abilities.
It sounds like it just creates this amazing upward spiral.
It does. It really does. It goes from that linear kind of incremental growth to something much more exponential, right?
Right.
When your brain is wired for abundance, you're not just like slightly better off. Your whole landscape of possibilities just starts to expand.
Yeah, that is powerful.
It is.
So the key takeaway for me, and I hope for everyone listening, is that this journey to abundance, it's not about positive thinking. It's not about, wishful thinking. It's about putting in the effort and engaging in practices that actually rewire our brains.
That's it. That's it. And this billionaire brainwave isn't just for billionaires. It's not this exclusive trait reserved for a select few. It's actually a set of neurological patterns that we can all learn and cultivate.
Mhm.
The brain you were born with, that's just the starting point. The brain that you develop over time, through your habits, through your focus, that's what determines your true potential.
I love that. So for all of us listening, what's the first step we should take?
I would say pick one of those practices that we talked about today and just start. Maybe it's just committing to, you know, writing down 3 things that you're grateful for tonight, or taking a few moments to just consciously interrupt a scarcity thought when it comes up.
Yeah.
Just observe any subtle shifts that you notice in your perception, in your decisions, or the outcomes that happen.
So start small, be consistent, pay attention.
That's it. That's it. And as you do this, you'll find that these practices just become easier and more integrated into your daily life.
Awesome. Well, this has been such a fantastic deep dive into the neuroscience of abundance.
Yeah.
It really makes you think, right?
It is.
Can we afford not to make this shift? I'm not sure that we can.
I agree.
Well, thank you for sharing your expertise with us today. It's been awesome.
My pleasure.
And thank you to everyone who tuned in for this deep dive.
Yes, thank you.
We hope you gained some valuable insight today. We'll see you next time.
See you next time.